Hey there, I'm Pete Townsend, and this is Money Never Sleeps. We look inside the minds of entrepreneurs and at the crossover of startups, enterprise, finance, technology, and life as we know it. This week, I'm joined once again by the brilliant Santamaria for a far-ranging discussion inspired by Ian Golden's concept of the butterfly defect, a thought-provoking take on the risks and interconnectedness of our global systems. We dive into how this idea resonates with the evolution of the financial markets and crypto, and explore how the convergence of traditional and decentralized systems could reshape the future. Mai, an award-winning fintech and financial policy expert, has been a trailblazer in shaping regulatory and strategic frameworks in Ireland. With deep expertise in digital finance and a passion for innovation, Mai brings her unique perspective to our conversation, exploring the challenges and the opportunities of hyperconnectivity in our global economy. It's a deep and engaging conversation that offers insights into how globalization, technology, and finance all intertwine. All right here on Money Never Sleeps. So Mai Santamaria of the Fintech 15. Was it the Fintech 15 or the Fintech 25?
Should have been 2000. There's an incredible amount of women out there. It's just, I think, small representation. I was very happy to be one of them. But yeah, it's great.
It seems like every time you're on the show, Mai, that I'm congratulating you for getting another award.
Stop it. You make it sound, honestly. No, listen, it's great. Actually, it really is great. For me personally, because imposter syndrome is always really running high when I meet those incredible people. But mostly when I actually meet these incredible women. There are so many of them in Ireland.
There are.
Yeah.
Yeah, you're in good company. Elaine Diaz on the list, Fidelma McGurk. Lots of just wonderful people on that list. So
yeah, and for me personally, to go through that list and I kind of go, I've met her, I've been so lucky I've met her, I've spoken to her. I was just like, I don't know her, I need to reach out to her. Yeah. So yeah, it's incredible.
Yeah, so congratulations on that. Thank you for coming back to the show. We've had some great chats and I wanted to get one more in before Santa. And when I have these deep thoughts sometimes, I'm like, all right, who's a good person to talk to about this? It's Mai Santamaria. And I was walking across Enniskerry Road here in Stepaside last week, going up the first few steps of Burrow Hill. And at the top of Burrow Hill, you could see all of Dublin from up there. It's very contemplative. I don't stop and think about things. I just keep walking, but I'm looking out across Dublin Bay. And I'm listening to the FinTech Blueprint with Lex Sokolin. Great guy. Shout out to Lex. And he's been doing that podcast for years, and he gets one out every single week. He does really well with that. And he's talking to Tom Duff Gordon, who is the head of international policy from Coinbase.
Great guy, Tom.
And yeah, shout out to Tom as well. And Tom mentions two words that I hadn't heard before, but he mentions them in the context where I kind of understood. And that was the butterfly defect. And I've always been a fan of the butterfly effect. The movie that came out in 2004 with Ashton Kutcher. Not sure if you saw that. Did you see that? It was good. It was kind of a psychological, mind-bending, not necessarily thriller, but at least something that got you thinking.
Mm-hmm.
And the whole idea of the butterfly effect, as you know, is that a butterfly flapping its wings in Peru may trigger a typhoon in Japan. And it's just the world is so super connected that these events are all related and can be connected to one another. I always get fascinated by these types of connections. And Owen Fitzgerald and I did a show a number of years back where we talked about what happened with the GameStop stock. And that was back in 2021 with Keith Gill, who was going by a different name back then on Reddit, that he basically triggered this huge run up and then run down in the GameStop stock that caught people's attentions all over the world for the power of the crowd and this hyperconnectivity. And I think that was one example of it for me. So I did a bit of Googling and I found the butterfly defect. And it's this professor, he's a former VP of the World Bank, Ian Golden. And it was a book that he wrote in 2014. And this is what Tom Duff Gordon was referring to. And the butterfly defect, and this is a quote from the book or a quote from some of the articles that I've seen about this, is that the butterfly defect addresses the widening gap between systemic risks and their effective management, shows how the new dynamics of turbocharged globalization have the potential and power to destabilize our societies. In short, and this is Aled Jones, who wrote in The Actuary in 2021, 7 years later, a shock in one region is now able to spread more easily around the globe, leading to a higher risk of system-level collapse. I thought this was something like, okay, we've got another kind of doomsday scenario here. Hey, globalization sucks, all that type of stuff. But when you read into it, it's like, that's not it at all. It's that we just have to be mindful of the risks of globalization and being so hyper-connected, So I dug into this a bit and wanted to kind of get some of your thoughts on that. But and any initial thoughts before we kind of dive into some of the themes here?
First thought is don't stop walking up the hill, because it's great. Because that gives us the opportunity to then follow up with, crazy over virtual coffee discussions like today.
Yeah.
You listening to a podcast and having those thoughts, they're like butterflies themselves. Just follow them. But listen, when you reached out to me about the butterfly defect idea, something in my mind triggered, why would it be called butterfly defect, which is kind of the opposite of butterfly effect, right? Yeah. And I had heard of the butterfly effect, I suppose, not because of the Ashton Kutcher's movie, but and I'm really showing off my super nerdy credentials here, but because we've probably seen the Big Bang Theory twice now, this day to my house. We think it's hilarious. And obviously we're not physicists and we're not scientists. So sometimes there are jokes that we totally miss and we take it up ourselves to maybe do a little research. And there was a joke recently, Heisenberg principle or something, none of us got it. But that one thing took us into butterfly effect and chaos theory. But when you think about it for a second, the reason behind the butterfly effect, and Lawrence, who was a meteorologist, but a mathematician before that, when he came up with the idea, which was by accident, effectively, and try to imagine this even from a finance prediction perspective, and from financial stability perspective. You have a set of inputs, of variables, and if you go back historically, you put them into a model, they should take you to more or less to a prediction. And the interesting thing about the butterfly effect, and you can check that online, and there's YouTube videos, and there's some great stuff even for kids to follow, is that when you take two variables, the starting point, even the tiniest amount of a variance leads to completely different outcomes. And that's definitely very important from a meteorological perspective, because you start with, say, a small number of variables at the start, 5, 6, 7, 10. The smallest amount of variance of any of those inputs will end up with a very different output in the model. And it's important because sometimes people say, well, effectively, look up now at crypto assets and crypto, there is no financial stability impact. So unless the other things about the butterfly effect is that two variables can continue parallel into the future and never cross.
Yeah.
And there's an element of, we've seen things happen, but they've never really crossed over to the traditional markets. Hence, that potential impact won't actually be there. So when you reached out to me about the idea of the butterfly defect, which I had not heard of, my mind went into, are we saying that these inputs, these variables as we know them today, no longer will actually run into the future in parallel, they actually will cross over? Yeah. Is this where it is? And it really exploded this whole different way of looking at it.
Interesting.
So, yeah.
Interesting. Those two arcs, and I paraphrased Martin Luther King last week on an episode I did with the team from Swarm, where I said there was a long arc to the financial markets and they bend towards tokenization. I think Martin Luther King said there's a long arc of societal evolution or something like that, and it bends towards justice, right? And there's a couple of arcs for me. There's the arc of the crypto markets, but there's the arc of the traditional financial markets. And I totally expect that crossover to happen, and the crossover of those two arcs. And there's this globalization context here that says that we've got each jurisdiction perhaps looking at crypto jurisdiction by jurisdiction. In Europe, luckily, we have that across all of the European Union. But we have the US taking one view on it. We have Singapore, we have Hong Kong, we have all these other major worldwide jurisdictions taking different views on it. This is not necessarily anti-globalization, but is this actually an example of people being mindful of the butterfly defect and saying that, well, you know what, we need to do more here. We need to look at the impact in each one of these different jurisdictions and say, we're going to consider our citizens first and consider our individuals first and do what we need to do to protect them from systemic risks. Yeah. One of the kind of ideals of the description of the butterfly defect is that the things that it can lead to are financial crises that spill over across borders because of things like supply chain impacts, emerging markets, labor, ports, power grids, social inequalities, because if you're not on the train of connectivity, then you will fall behind. That education is something that's so critical to the development of the world. And if you are not connected to this whole globalization machine, that you perhaps will be left behind. Technology, obviously, with cyber attacks and cybersecurity threats and the misuse of emerging technologies, all of these things are increasingly global challenges. So the idea of the butterfly defect is not to say don't globalize. It's that, yes, globalize, but do it with care and consideration and collaboration across different countries. But I think to get this right first, that country by country, we still need to do that individually. And that was one of the thoughts that I had coming out of kind of this whole deep thought about the butterfly defect and connecting that to crypto.
But it is. But it's crypto, Web3, even. It's spot on in saying it certainly prompted me to do a lot of self-reflection. And your challenge is absolutely right. I mean, how much of that understanding, really, of globalization is across society at all levels, from an economy perspective, from a finance perspective, from an energy perspective, from a sustainability perspective, supervisory perspective. I mean, just consider this. We say we look at financial stability globally. Yeah, let's put it from a supervised perspective.
Yep.
Look at traditional markets. Just mention the traditional markets. Anyone who's been in private sector, not in a regulatory capacity or risk capacity, but there are certain standards, certain KPIs that you use. And these are markers that allow you to then raise red flags, right? So we have your accounts and you have your analysis and you have your ratios and you have your reports. So now, if you look at currently what we have and you look about the cross-border and online nature of crypto asset flows, you look at the data, you look at the velocity of change of that data. Does any of that fit into any report or set of known KPIs? So if it doesn't, how could we possibly supervise the financial stability or other impacts of that data?
You can't.
How are you looking at something that you can't put in a box to then analyze?
I know. And one of the great things about crypto is that all of this data is public. It's on a public ledger and you can go look at it and hammer into the analytics as much as you want. But one of the big thoughts I had on this as well, Mai, was that going back to 2008, when there was something called Dodd-Frank that came out. Yeah. And that was in response to all of the financial engineering that had taken place in the first 7-8 years of the decade of the millennium. And that where you had all of these financial derivatives that were doing things such as creating exposures that were 10 times the GDP of the planet. Yeah. And so Dodd-Frank, that law came in and said, we're going to require you to do all this reporting. If you're trading in derivatives or however you're trading, you're an institution, you've got to report your exposures. This huge fire hydrant of data and information coming to regulators. My question is, obviously, it's known that being able to possibly consume all of that data and be able to do something with it is not in the realm of the possible. But does the fact that institutions need to report this and need to go through the process of creating the processes to be able to report it, does that make them more responsible? Does that make them more risk-minded? Does that make them more considerate towards, am I creating a systemic risk by taking on all of this exposure? Right? Is that a real thing, or is that me just being hopeful towards responsible trading?
Oh, really? I mean, sometimes we wonder, if more reporting, more transparency, more accountability, really the answer? Maybe not.
I don't know.
No,
I don't know what the answer is.
I really don't know. Yeah.
I don't know what the answer is. And I'm hopeful that is a thing, but I think I would need to sit down with, the head of institutional trading at BlackRock to figure this out. Or AIG, who was one of the big names from the financial crisis, and say, how have things changed for you? Maybe I'll do that. Right?
Well, I mean, why not? But do you think financial stability and the rest of the risk, because we're talking about systemic risk, the nature of it is in the name, right? Is the risk piece. And financial market is about risks, about how to mitigate the risks, how you price it, how you utilize it. And that's how we got us, as you know. We were not able to know really where the risk was sitting on whose balance sheet all those years ago because we didn't follow through the risk. Now, when it's on-chain or off-chain or online or not, or it's open source or not open source, maybe with blockchain technology, there would be a lot more transparency on where that risk lies, but certainly be able to pinpoint what it is. Could you reduce that risk by having some kind of self-executing risk stop? Maybe that's a possibility technically that we actually don't currently have with the current financial markets. And maybe that's where the link or the bridge to that traditional market perspective. You mentioned there, Pete. It's not about the cryptocurrency, but it's about actually maybe using that technology onto the traditional financial instruments. So from a risk perspective, maybe there's an element of it's more about building in that switch off mechanism at transaction level. You wouldn't need to be reporting and then, retrospectively look at where the red flags are, because you'd be stopping the contagion or the risk starting.
Oh yeah, it's all there. It's all possible. And I'm seeing some fascinating things come into, I'm now reviewing 650 plus applications. Well, Hugh McGurr and I are for Techstars
that
came in. And
great number for play.
I'm seeing some incredible stuff, like where you can effectively take a token, and when you mint that token, you can put a little net around it before it goes into someone's wallet. The owner of that token, it's in their wallet. It's been issued to their crypto address. It is theirs. But there's also a smart contract that's written around that says, if you don't meet this criteria, that net, we're going to pull that net and we're going to pull it right out of your wallet, right? And so that can be used for things such as this token represents a rental contract where you're not fulfilling the obligations to pay your rent. This token. So there's so many different things, and the technology is moving so fast, the development is moving so fast. And to your point, everything is there for market monitors. Everything is there on a public ledger, right? For the longest time, in the first probably 10 years of the blockchain evolution that started back in 2009, what we saw in the financial markets was people talking about private permissioned blockchains.
Yeah.
And I was reading a piece this morning in CoinDesk that was suggesting that those things actually create more risks, and that the public regulatory mindset is moving towards being on public blockchains. And I think the momentum is there.
Look, this is great to hear because, listen, Pete, I mean, I said this before, I think, to you offline, but I find super exciting about the technology is that it opens the realm of opportunities, not to just do what we've done in financial traditional markets in a faster, more cost-effective way, but really addresses the financial transaction at a level that we hadn't considered before. The fact that you could have self-executing, self-settling insurance contracts.
Yeah.
Just consider the efficiency gains, the reduction in risks. There are so many other levels that we haven't explored. That is, to me, more exciting than just kind of going, well, we're just going to use those to do what we continue to doing. We'll do this, with the same level of risks, all level, market or personal, blah, blah, blah. We'll do this sort of reporting. It's just literally digitizing without innovating.
It is.
So it's super exciting to hear about you. You really are looking at a new idea of that.
One of the things I'm worried about is this being an echo chamber. And I think I keep pulling up examples of it not being, in that I think it was Sunday morning, I was looking at my phone to see where my son's soccer match was, or football. And it was up in Darrendale. When I saw that it was in Darrendale, I had a funny experience years ago with a friend of mine up in Darrendale, and I won't tell that story. But so I took a screenshot of the location and I texted it to my friend in Malaysia, because that's where he lives now. He's originally from Dublin, but he lives in Malaysia. And I did that because I'd made a more concerted effort since Thanksgiving for some reason, where I was texting some of my friends back in Boston. I said, listen, I've just got to keep up with my friends a bit more. I've got to message them. I'm going to be the one out on the front foot. I'm going to start this. And so I said, all right, I'm going to text this over to my buddy in Malaysia. And he comes back and he says, Pete, I'm right around the corner from there. I'm like, what? He turned up there at kickoff. I thought he was in Malaysia. He had just got back to Dublin on Saturday for a 2-week trip to sell his old house. right? Because they were
I
were
know.
done with it. And we caught up and it was wonderful.
How,
And he's been in crypto, but also still in TradFi for the last 7-8 years. I actually got him into this. And he came into the conversation that we were talking about. And he said, listen, this is happening. That in the conversations he's having at the institutional level, this is happening. And that he is expecting this. And he has an imagination, like I do, of what the world will look like when we have the financial markets operating on blockchains and we have securities operating as tokens. And that's one of the things that I always try just to think about to temper my own enthusiasm.
That's fair.
And that it like this startup idea I just shared with a token on the net, get very excited about that, right? My question is, does our interconnectivity make it feel like an idea in my head has a ton of acceptance, or an idea in a startup founder's head has a ton of acceptance and momentum worldwide, but that it's just the speed with which the information travels and moves around this small circle that we're part of here, of, that pops it back into my news feed and makes me think like it's got a ton more support than it actually does. And that I always think about that quote from William Gibson to kind of justify this, that the future is already here. It's just not that evenly distributed. But still, it's that we're in a very small space. This is less than 5 million people on chain. So on the actual using the decentralized on chain apps, or dApps as they're called, developers that are working on this is, less than 30,000 of the 30 million developers that are worldwide. And it's moving so fast and moving so quickly. But there's still Chris Dixon from A16Z Crypto is talking to Rick Rubin on Rick Rubin's podcast, the big American music producer, and he had never heard of stablecoins. Charlie Munger, before he died, God bless him, may he rest in peace, had never heard of stablecoins when he was talking to John Collison from Stripe. It was so evident that he hadn't been aware of it. So to me, it's like optimism, thinking about what the future is going to look like and getting very excited about that and finding those investments that are representative of that vision. But it's also being aware of the echo chamber situation a little bit as well.
Listen, I think it's a fair challenge. And I love the way you always want to critic, it's just like you want to really get yourself, make sure they're always grounded no matter what. And it is easy to say you got passionate about something, you're excited about something, but is it worth it? In a day it's your life, not only for yourself, but also for all the companies that you're supporting, through Techstars. So let me share with you my grounding. Am I in the echo chamber moment? I step aside of what I see from a finance perspective, and I take it back in Catalonia. In Catalan, we have this saying that we say that I'm like St. Thomas, so com Sant Tomàs, veure, tocar y posar-lo al nas. Which means I'm like St. Thomas, I need to see it, touch it, and stick my nose in it.
Yes.
So this is a case of, if I want to see really what it looks like, or if I can't touch it, I won't believe it. So for me, getting out of the echo chamber is I go back, step back from what it is, and just like physically, what does it mean to me? And I think I mentioned this to you in the past as well. For example, I was starting to look at how is the digital economy being supported by, say, satellite technology in Europe. That was one of them. The second one, which has been a fascinating journey over the last few months, has been looking at their subsea cables. So I discovered recently that all the data, every single piece of data, digital data in Ireland, leaves Ireland on a cable. 99% of data leaves Ireland on cables. Do you know how many cables we have in Ireland that would deal with all the data in Ireland? You're talking about your Meta, your Googles, your Instagrams, your financial transactions.
No.
Do you know how many? Say a number.
100.
14.
Oh my God.
Now, that always brings
snip.
That don't say that. But this brings it really lead to reality, and you're going to go, okay, I'm excited about this, but it's a tiny data package in a very cramped cable. It just kind of makes me think about it really, and I think out of those 14, maybe 4 of them only are between UK and the US.
Wow.
So it brings, for me, always puts a bit of perspective and kind of say, oh my God, really, what does this mean? And what's my relationship to it and what are we doing? And so, and in conversation, I mean, how much of this transactional data, it's, we're taking a big highway, are we on the slow lane, on the fast lane, or are we on the curve? So this really helps me to put things in perspective and kind of go, okay, hold on a second. We're one of many.
Like if those cables were cut, right? How would our thinking evolve? What would we do? And I think if those cables were cut, that is thinking about some major cataclysmic event. One of the posts that I found related to the butterfly defect, it was the guy, Alan Jones from the Actuary. He said that if there was a major, as he called it, a decomplexification event, where global connectivity just ends, some fiber optic disaster, something like that, he said the best place to survive a collapse like that would be islands or island continents with strong oceanic climatic influence. New Zealand was ranked number 1. Australia was number 2. And guess what number 3 was?
Ireland.
Yep. And so we got everything we need here.
Yeah.
Right. So if those cables do get cut, then we know what to do. Right.
Yeah. But listen, it's fascinating you say that, because interestingly enough, during COVID, all the big billionaires, I should say, with the big bunkers, they all went over to New Zealand during COVID pandemic. But this is fascinating. And I'd like to I'm going to pick that up and read more about why Ireland maybe was a third one, or not any of the island states. But let me let my own butterfly thoughts on this point, which is something I've been thinking, trying to get with this echo chamber and actually really going back to where is it coming from? This St. Thomas of touching and feeling it. You imagine a world where we're going to, from a Web3 perspective, but from a digital economy and also from a financial services perspective. There's an element of here that I'm not sure whether we've explored, but maybe there is a chance for Ireland to explore, which is, does Ireland have a space, a strategic position to really put ourselves forward as to if sustainability of the financial services in the future? And I don't mean sustainability from a green perspective, but from a connectivity perspective. Because just think about geographically where Ireland is.
Yeah.
For me, discovering, for example, this subsea cable still was a mind-blowing idea. We have a large financial services sector here. We have now a very growing digital assets and tokenization ecosystem. If we could market ourselves, we could actually build ourselves this identity and obviously offering to say, from a financial services perspective, we can offer a 24/7, 365-day financial services sector that is sustainable and reliable and resilient.
Ooh.
Imagine we could do that.
And we can, because of the geographical location of Ireland and data centers and cooling and...
Yeah. And I'm looking at sustainable as in resilience, not sustainable just only in green, but effectively, and that's an interesting thing, they actually are linked, because if you have all these data, all the subsea cables, for example, do you need data centers to put this in? Yes, you would. And where would you put those data centers? In places where you have the right combinations from a climatic perspective, but also very little geographic impact events.
Yeah.
There's just so many things you could put through it. I would love to be able to explore that further. Since I've only just started to really scratch the surface to how these would look like. But that future that you referred to, Pete, in terms of, is this an echo chamber? Am I alone?
No,
is
I'm
this
feeling
coming
better
back
that
to
it
me?
might not be now. That, we've got, in Ireland, all the crypto players are here, right?
Yeah.
They're all here post-Brexit. And we've got MiCA, the regulation that is going live. We've got, I think, just a unique culture in Ireland, obviously, but also being part of the European culture is something interesting. We have all the major financial services players here. We have all the big tech players here.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of the ingredients that are here to do something like that.
Yeah.
And now you really got me thinking, Mai.
Okay, good. Well, that's why we chat. You got me thinking. I'll get you thinking back.
Totally. There's so much out there. Like,
Mm.
there are these green shoots. And it was that chat with Linda Jang, and thank you for introducing me to Linda, that where she and I talked a couple months ago,
Awesome woman.
Last month about stablecoin usage in emerging markets, and that
Mhm.
stablecoins are now solving problems that they were never intended to solve when
Yeah.
crypto traders first dreamt them up 10, 12 years ago. And that people in emerging markets are actually using them to manage their financial lives and to do that in US dollar. There's plenty more opportunities like that. And I was listening to another crypto exec was saying on a podcast probably about 6 months ago that, listen, look at all of this institutional infrastructure we've built around crypto ETFs, and was suggesting that this isn't just for crypto ETFs. This is for being able to hold assets that are tokenized that may not be crypto. They may
Yeah.
be tokenized securities. There's tons of momentum going in this direction. It does make me feel better.
No, listen, let me share two things. Not that you need encouragement or, not that you need to brighten up, but more about these concerns maybe you have about the echo chamber. One, like for me, as you know, I've been looking at this since 2017. It really started like I'm the crazy person working on, the whole people that don't want to talk to me because I have all these strange words I'm talking about, like Bitcoin and, technology. Nobody wanted to talk to me, to constantly having to prepare briefings, papers, updates, discussions about this. Like it's no longer, it's a topic that is no longer sitting in a corner of an office and a one-off discussion. And I think for me, the moment really that it went proper mainstream was last year when India had the presidency of G20 and specifically said, FSB, please, we need a report. We need to have a look at our crypto assets. This was India at G20 level saying, we have to look at this. And yes, cryptocurrencies had already featured at G20 level 4 or 5 years ago. It wasn't a priority item, but certainly not to the extent, I think, particularly, I said that the India presidency, the focus that it put on it last year. And this year, you have South Africa leading the G20, and it's on the agenda.
Yeah.
And considering the Castle report about the use of global stablecoins, particularly in those emerging markets and development economies, this is not a small echo chamber topic anymore. That is actually being discussed at that level. So that to me, as that is my positive. It's being discussed at this level, whether it be enough or not. As I know, back to the start of this discussion about we don't even have the data to be able to supervise it. But anyway, at least we're looking at it and we're discussing it. And if people don't know what a stablecoin is, they'll make sure at least at that level, they'll be putting their hands up and they'll talk about it. And the other, maybe the personal experience piece, obviously, your kids ask you, what do you do, Daddy? And, like my kids ask me, what are you doing? And it's sometimes been hard to explain. So my eldest just started first year and he's doing business. And, a few weeks ago, he was doing money. And they were told and they being taught about money is how it started. Was it for the characteristics of money and, so forth. And we're in the car driving home, picked up from school. So we talked to him, and then he mentioned that the teacher had talked about digital money. And he said, Mum, is that what you do at work?
Wow.
Well, I was like, what do you mean? And then I was like, I was curious, like, did the teacher ask did he explain to you what digital money was? And he said to me, well, there's e-money, but that's different from digital currencies. And then he said, but you mentioned once, I heard you say something about Bitcoin, and that was scarce. And what turned out a very long journey home because of the traffic, he had a million questions about Bitcoin. And he was linking in when I've said, well, it's a scarce because of this 21 million, blah, blah, blah. And so, well, that's very good because, money's not, there's no scarcity in money, but gold is scarce. And he was linking in everything he learned. And that really gave me a lot of hope because I'm going to go, hold on a second, we're going somewhere here. This is really interesting. So within a few hours, he linked in all these traditional money concepts to the concept. And then I think somehow he got a better idea what I do on a day-to-day basis at work. But it was fascinating. Fascinating, yeah.
That is, that's fantastic that in the educational system, it's actually making its way into what they talk to kids about.
Yeah.
And, my kids they they're aware of what I do, probably not sure exactly what that is. And I say very, simply, listen, in order for a startup company to grow, it needs capital. And I help them to do that and do a few other things along the way. And they're like, well, what kind of companies? And then I talk about, okay, money and crypto. And so when they hear about Bitcoin, that they bring it back to me, but they haven't yet had that type of educational experience. So I will be pushing them in that direction. What I say to my kids is, listen, and this is just more recent. And I, again, heard it on a podcast. It's a founders podcast with David Senra. And he's talking about all these great leaders through history and entrepreneurs through history going back hundreds of years. And that he said, listen, the number one thing that you can tell your kids is just to find something that you're curious about and become a learning machine.
Right.
And that whatever it is that kind of tickles their brain and says, listen, I just want to figure this out. Just learn about it. Do as much as you can. Unfortunately, in the 1980s, for me, it was baseball statistics, and that didn't do much for me. But I turned the corner in the 90s.
Well, I'm sure it makes Moneyball very interesting to watch for you.
Absolutely, over and over again. I once actually tried to say, listen, could we apply some type of Moneyball type theory to the financial markets in order to predict, like in Moneyball does, where it's able to kind of somewhat predict player performance, predict the number of wins that a baseball team may have, that if you were actually able to do that with the financial markets, it would be priced out. Right?
Yeah. I would wonder whether the butterfly effect would have something to say to those predictions.
Absolutely.
Because, there are too many of them. Obviously, the outcomes would be very variable.
Yep. What is something linked back to? What is it all rooted back to? And can you replicate that? Or is it just pure coincidence? And is it the butterfly flapping its wings in Peru? Or is it the Chilean wind farm that started the typhoon? Wonderful. Well, listen, you've calmed my head down. So thank you very much. Appreciate it. Wonderful to chat with you again on this. And I know I'll be talking to you again soon, but we are rolling into December. So have a fantastic holiday season.
Thank you. Same to you. And don't stop walking up the hill and coming up with those great ideas. Just love chatting to you, please.
Fantastic. Thank you, Mai.
No worries. Thanks. Bye.
That does it for this week, folks. Thanks again to Mai Santamaria for joining me as guest co-host this week. Check out the show notes on moneyneversleeps.ie for all of the relevant links to go deeper. Mai originally featured on episode 5 of Money Never Sleeps back in 2018, and she made a cameo on our 200th episode in 2022. 3 of the episodes that I did with Mai recently, episode 241 on the crossover of blockchain and AI, and episode 247 and episode 260 on digital identity, have been very popular with our most loyal listeners, so make sure you check those out. If you like what you heard, please leave us a rating and a review on Apple Podcasts or Spotify, as it helps others to find the show. Also, thanks to Conan Brophy from Create Sound for mixing and editing this episode. Conan is an excellent media man to get in touch with when you're thinking about launching your own podcast. As for me, I'm an early-stage startup investor focused on where fintech meets crypto and crypto meets Web3, and I lead the Techstars Web3 Accelerator. There are plenty of links in the show notes on moneyneversleeps.ie on how to get in touch, so don't hesitate to reach out. Finally, till next time, thanks for listening. See ya!